Being no objection, leave is granted. Senator Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I'd like to speak to Document 6, the Economic References Committee report, the government response to their report on Australia's insurance industry. This response just appeared it was just tabled earlier this week, and there's already been some speeches on it. And I'd like to firstly relate it back to my comments to an earlier document about how disappointing it is the length of time the government takes to respond to important reports and important recommendations. I'd have to say, in regards to this report and this issue, the government's response has been fairly disappointing. But I particularly wanted to go to just one part of this inquiry and how it relates to another report and another inquiry that occurred a couple of years ago. And that is in regards to insurance premiums in the northern part of my own state of Queensland. As senators would know, I've only been back in this chamber a few months and still getting across the finer details of issues affecting people around the state, but one that was certainly brought to my attention very quickly was by a woman from Ellie Beach named Margaret Shaw. I expect many of us here have got emails from her over the years, wanting to ensure that we are all aware that this problem of high insurance premiums in northern Queensland has not gone away and has still not been adequately addressed. And it's not just a matter of high insurance premiums. There are premiums that are much higher relative to other parts of the state and other parts of the country. It's also been the rapid rate. If they'd always been high, people could have, or they had gradually increased, perhaps people could have adapted. But there's been extremely rapid increases in insurance premiums for many people. This isn't just individuals in homes, it's also and particularly affecting people in unit blocks and body corporates and strata titles, and of course it also affects businesses and small businesses in particular, their ability to function, as any small business person would say, at least ones that work from a real-world premises rather than online. Insurance costs for their premises can be a major cost, and to have them go up so substantially and so quickly in such a short period of time has caused major harm and major disadvantage to many people. And it doesn't take much imagination to think why. If you're a person on a fixed income, particularly a retired person, you're living in a unit with a body corporate strata title, you're required by law to have that property insured, and your premiums double in a short space of time or more. You suddenly can't afford your premiums, or if that has an impact on the value of the property, so people then lose the value of their property because it's uninsurable or the premiums are so high that people don't want to buy it. And it's put some people in an appalling bind. And this isn't a problem with an easy solution, I'd have to say, but it's certainly a problem where more can be done than what has been done. And I wanted to point to the report that was brought down back in November 2015 by the Northern Australian Insurance Premiums Task Force, and the government did a response to this finally, and they did it in that typical and sadly very cynical way of releasing the response by the Minister, Kelly O'Dwyer, the week before Christmas. So with people waiting for 2 years in northern Queensland saying, what's happening with this? What are you going to do? What's your response? What's the action? It's urgent. We've been talking about it for years. The government takes 2 years to respond and then slips it out just before Christmas. They obviously gave a heads up to the insurance industry though, because the insurance industry were out within a minute with a press release congratulating the government on their response, which was not to intervene in the insurance market at all. Now, I'm not saying government intervention is the sole solution to everything, but when you've got market failure on a massive scale, as has happened here, then clearly there is a role for government, or there should be a role and can be a role for government to play in intervening. And that is something that the Greens certainly believe needs to be given much stronger consideration. Now, unfortunately, in regards to this report, even its terms of reference when it was set up, was explicitly set up with the requirement that when considering the options for action, the task force had to look at how any role of government involvement could be reduced. So even if they were to suggest or consider government intervention, it had to be on the basis of how the government could get out again as quickly as possible. So they had one hand tied behind the back before they started. And the government's response has basically been partly to blame the states, time-honoured federal government response to anything, and partly to suggest that more money might be invested in mitigation in regards to cyclone damage to make buildings more resilient and the like. And that certainly is welcome. But it is very clear that mitigation alone is not going to fix this issue, and the suggestion that mitigation, unless it's on a massive scale, is going to in itself drive down insurance premiums is nonsense. So I'd certainly say to the government that this is an issue that I, on behalf of the Greens as a Queensland Senator, will be focusing quite heavily on to try and push them to do a lot more, because there is more that can be done. Now, I would like to commend the Liberal or LNP member for Leichhardt, Mr Warren Ench, who has been going on about this issue for at least 6 years. Margaret Shaw, and amongst all the documents he emailed around, included many speeches of Mr Ench about this. And I'll certainly be seeking his expertise in regards to the best ways forward, because I certainly don't pretend to have all of the solutions. But what I do say quite clearly is that there is more for government to do. And if the insurance industry is going to continue to gouge people, or is going to continue to skyrocket insurance premiums, frankly, they might be justifiable according to the internal maths of insurance actuaries, but they're not justifiable in terms of that basic principle of fairness. And in that circumstance, if the market is failing, then those companies need to be either required to change their behaviour, or the government needs to take over from them. There used to, of course, be a very direct role for government in insurance. I can remember in Queensland, and I know with other states, possibly all of them, had a state government insurance office that specifically ensured that affordable basic insurance was available to everybody, and particularly to battlers. Now, I'm not explicitly saying we have to go back precisely to that model, but let's remember that this federal government itself, or its predecessor actually, the Howard government, did introduce an insurance pool, a direct government intervention in regards to terrorism situations, because insurers won't insure against it, and people were left unable to cover costs in the rare circumstance, in the terrible circumstance of an incident that's designated as a terrorist one. So we've already got that precedent there of the government doing that in regards to that areas. And let's not ignore the elephant in the room here. A very clear reason why insurance companies are, in some respects quite logically, hiking insurance premiums enormously is because of climate change. And scientist after scientist has said that there will be more severe weather events. And people always say in Northern Queensland, of course, well, we've always had cyclones through here, and they have. But the frequency and particularly the severity of them is undoubtedly going to increase. And there's scientist after scientist saying that. Now, the government might be quite happy to ignore scientists and ignore the facts about climate change, but people whose insurance companies have actually got money on the line are not ignoring the science, and they are quite clearly indicating a recognition that the damage from intense weather events, such as cyclones, is likely to be worse, because those events are likely to be more intensive. So that basic reality is being ignored, and that, I think, is clearly one of the reasons why there's been inadequate action from this government. Of course, over some of this period of time, the previous Labor government was also in power. So I'd like to really urge more focus on the human reality of this. I just last week was in Northern Queensland, in Cairns, in Kuranda, in Ingham, asking people about this very issue, and quite a lot of them, unprompted, could give stories about huge hikes in insurance premiums and how difficult it had made them. In one case, somebody who'd had to basically close down their business because they couldn't afford it. So it's something that is having a direct effect on many people's lives. And spoke before about the economic viability long term of Northern Queensland. Well, this is a key issue that's got to be addressed. The government already kicks in, to their credit, a lot of money in after disasters. So there's spending happening anyway. Putting some money into dealing with intervening in the insurance industry
Thank you,
is another
Senator
approach.
Bartlett. Your time has expired. Are you seeking leave to continue your remarks? No. So the question is that the motion is moved by Senator Bartlett to take note of that document, and number 6 be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes